Right, hello, welcome to the Sisyphus complex solution. This is where one of those episodes where I do the world population, which over the last year and a half, 2 years now, that I've been doing it on a quarterly basis, and so this is part 10 of that. So I'll be showing sort of like the last data that I took was on December the 15th, by the way. What I'll show is the information and that over the past year, but at the same time I'll also show the totals over the full 5 3/4 years that I've been doing the data since I started collecting it, and so you'll get a good overview as to how the population has actually been acting as such, what has really been taking place, considering so many conversations are taking place around up, down, or whatever and that these days. A quick mention, because in the last week's episode I did say that I was going to be changing my drinks to be a little bit more Christmassy, so last week I was having a G&T. I had actually planned to have some Irish cream tonight, and I do have the bottle here, but unfortunately I tried to test it last night, which is never a good idea. There is still some left, but having that 2 nights on the trot is a little bit much, so I've got other little tipples and that for other episodes, which I'll talk about later on towards the end. But because of having that last night, I'm going to have some red wine instead, so cheers. Right, so getting on with the actual proper stuff that I'm supposed to be doing in terms of providing the population data for you. So begin with Asia. Here's the raw data over that full 5 3/4 years. You can see fairly straightforward, no great wild swings. In terms of the variance, and for anybody that's here for the first time, basically what I do is I break that down to a month by month variance. So whenever I take the data, I'll then just divide that, the difference between the last reporting period, and then divide that by however many months it's been, and seeing as I do it every 3 months now, then I'll divide it by 3. Hence you get what the population change has been over each month. And you can see over the last, well, basically since September about September of 2024, it's not really changed much at all. Pretty much a flatline position, which is showing a distinct difference compared to the 2 previous years, where we've got that diamond shape that occurred that required explanation, but was a case of let's see how things go, and obviously it's not repeated again. So yeah, it does lead to another problem, but we'll go into that. So insofar as the granular details concerned, what you've got on the screen here then is that you've got the past year's variation data. So what's the change was, the number increase or decrease compared to the previous reporting time frame. So obviously you can see we've got the 4 variation time periods. The last one, that for December that I took, what was the difference between September and December? Right, those are the figures. Then you get within these latter columns, you've got the total change, and that is the change that has taken place since when I first took the data in March on March the 15th of 2020. What's that change from then till now, or till December the 15th anyway? And then what that means in terms of the total change, what percentage of the population has increased or decreased. And then beyond that, you've got breaking that down into a per year basis, a per year average percentage. Then at the bottom you can see that we've got a doubling of the figures here, and this is basically, this bottom line here is the previous quarter's reporting figures, and then obviously you've got this quarter's reporting here. And what we can see is that the population increase is decreasing, if you see what I mean. So essentially what we can tell is that the types of numbers, whether that be plus or minus for each nation, is pretty much staying on a a stable footing, so to speak. It's consistent, put it that way. So it's either consistently rising or it's consistently dropping. That doesn't really make a great deal of sense to me because, like I say, I mean, although that variance data chart did show these wide anomalies, one of the potential explanations for that, which did kind of make some sense, is that you do get seasonality within your numbers. I mean, you'll have births that take place at a particular time of year, and then you'll have people travelling abroad and then or completely moving abroad at different times of year. This type of thing happens on a seasonal basis. So when you see something that has got a fairly bland picture over the course of a year, that kind of indicates that something's not possibly quite right. We can see that, although I'm not going to be putting these kind of numbers up on the screen this time, we can see that once again Palestine continues to grow at its consistent rate. And we can all gasp as well about like the size of the increase in population in the likes of India and Pakistan. Because I mean, basically in that they're going either above or around 1 million a month. Pretty staggering numbers, but that's not really what I want to be concentrating on at this point. And the reason why is because I want to show you something a little bit different to normal. And so what we've got here is, this is the data for 3 countries, and comparing it between the figures that I take, which come from that Worldometer, which I have stated before that Worldometer produces its data from amalgamating all the information from various different countries, according to them. But then I'm comparing that to the information, or the closest information that I can find, just for these 3 countries for the time being, and I'll be doing something similar with each of the continents, showing a comparison between the Worldometer numbers and then what each of the governments are producing. And so, as per the, like I say, the latest disclosures that are available, and I want to look at if the dates don't quite correspond with the last population data that I took on December the 15th, I will look back at the particular time frame that is required to make the comparison. So China had data for the day that I checked, which I checked on the 16th rather than the 15th. So if there was going to be any kind of difference at all, it would literally just be 1 day, so it wouldn't be significant. Japan had data for November, but it was only preliminary, and so instead of taking that information, I took their confirmed number from the 1st of June. But then in terms of Pakistan, I had to compare it back against the year of their 2023 census data. The same principle will apply, and you'll see that I am choosing the corresponding dates if you bother to take a look. But I wanted to see what's the difference between what the governments are reporting and then these numbers that I'm getting from Worldometer, because it does lead towards a particular issue that I'll be pointing out throughout this video. So in the case of both China and Pakistan, Worldometer is over-reporting their numbers. And then for Japan, it's under-reporting their numbers. Now, obviously, that's going to start to become a bit of a problem, compounded already by the problem of things like China in particular. Because essentially in that, when I did, I can't remember if it was the last one or the one before, one of the two, it was either part 8 or part 9, feel free to check. But the Chinese are already grossly over-reporting their population. We know this. So when you've got a piece of data that says that the Chinese population is more than it should be, and then the Chinese population, as per the government, is more than we know it is, there's things that we need to be taken into consideration around this. But just in terms of these two comparisons, immediately there's an issue. It is also known that other nations, obviously, they're subject to various reporting error. I mean, probably not to the extent that China is. But what I want to be able to demonstrate is that we really do have an issue with population data. So I haven't gathered all data from every single nation as yet, but that's something I'm going to be looking to do as I go forward. And so when I come to do the end, the sort of summation of the information that I've been putting together, you'll start to come to understand the level of sort of wider issue this is going to start to come to represent. So keep this in mind. Worldometer data used by an awful lot of resources, by the way, and then trying to go through each and every government. There's anomalies there. So if we get into Europe, fairly similar sort of straight line, no great variation to be seen. With the monthly variance, again, over the period since September of 2024, we're looking at effectively like a flat line. Those two diamond anomalies not being repeated seems unusual. Then we go into the granular, and here we can see from the past year's data, a similar type of situation where there's not really much of a change in terms of the types of values according to each nation. But we can check to see that past 3 months has not really seen too much in terms of a per year variance. You don't need to worry too much about this particular one, because obviously it's going to increase or decrease according to the total amount over the full period. This is the main one that we're looking at checking on to see if there's been any difference over the last 3 months. Now, Europe is obviously going to be one that I want to focus on the most, and as I start going further into these kinds of comparisons, I won't necessarily be doing all of it today, but because this is the one continent that is showing a wide level of dispersal of population reduction, and it does tend to be the one that people concentrate on most when they're looking at making this narrative about the potential impact of depopulation. That in itself provides a bit of an issue, just simply because of the fact that we do obviously know that there's this massive import from the third world taking place, and so when you've got the population seemingly dropping everywhere at the same time as you're importing billions of mammalians, something doesn't seem quite right there. Speaking of which, there is one source of propaganda around population that I do want to draw attention to, and that is the Vatican, because old Mr. I don't know what the first commandant means, Pope, he's recently been talking about people should have their open doors policy, and it shouldn't make any difference as to where anybody's coming from. Everybody's the blank slate, let them all in. Oh, woe is everybody, let them all in, and oh, it's a Christian thing to do. Whilst the population of the Vatican remains stuck over the course of the year at 500. Because they're not allowed in those walls, are they? Fairly obvious point, but still worth making. Right, for now, the 3 examples again in terms of government data. Germany's numbers are going to be compared against their June figures, UK against November, and then Portugal I've decided to include in that, and they're going to be put up against their 2024 census. Again, we've got the problem of Worldometer overstating the numbers for Germany and the UK, but then understating the numbers for Portugal. What we also know is that the UK is very likely heavily underreporting its population. Not quite to the extent of China, but anywhere between 10 and 20 million. Portugal has got a similar problem with this, but probably not at the same levels of UK. But I would certainly suggest that Portugal has got a very, very much higher rate of population than they're suggesting. Germany's always going to remain of interest because, frankly, it was down to their diktats under Merkel that created this open door to the third world policy right across Europe. And I find it very odd, or rather telling, that they are the ones that have reversed the trend for themselves. From April of 2023, their population has been dropping. Convenient, isn't it? Now, there will be accusations to be made if that shows to be true. But whichever way it goes, the EU are by far the biggest human traffickers and, quite frankly, criminals responsible for what has been happening in terms of this massive invasion across Europe and then into the UK. So I want to be very much keeping an eye on the European countries to see if there is some truth to them reversing this trend while still pushing it on us. That in particular I want to be paying attention to. But there's another reason why I want to be paying attention to the EU data, and then obviously within the UK as well. Because when it comes down to their population, we have to consider it in terms of the fact that all of the idiots are out there on a regular basis doing their saber rattling against Russia. And obviously I had a bit of a rant about that last week in terms of that route and talking about what grandparents did, and his grandparents fought for an entire 4 days. So yeah, if we're going to do what your grandparents did, that basically would mean nothing, wouldn't it? But I also want to bring this up in terms of what would the wider population of Europe do in the event of any kind of conflict, really, when they're talking about the UK has got to start going into things like considering conscription, and all the white boys that we've been abusing for all these years suddenly is supposed to go out and do all the fighting for them. Well, just a quick reminder then that I have a little map here. And this is a map of all of the countries around Europe that suddenly decided that they were neutral during World War II. Convenient, wasn't it? And I would also suggest that you take a look for yourself as to how fast every single European country, especially those within the EU, fell to the Germans. How fast it was. Because I think you'll find that 2 weeks was at the higher end of how much of a fight that they were able to put up. Not quite like Holland with their 4 days. But point here is, when we're getting this saber rattling from all these white flaggers, and they're talking about us being the ones that have to fight like our grandparents, not like yours, because yours didn't. Those of us in the UK really do need to remember that when anything does start or kick off or anything remotely like that, this entire continent, we're not a part of the continent, for clarity, we're an island, that entire continent will literally do that in an instant. And the ones that claimed neutrality, perfect example being Spain, the moment they did that, they also then provided a great deal of assistance to the Germans because, you know, neutral. The extent of fighting that these people will do is worthless. Utterly, utterly worthless. So they can yap about this one all day long. They would be wiped out in an instant. So my recommendation as far as that's concerned is when people do start going on about this sort of stuff, get all of your Bamalians and your green-haired leftists and all of the Ramonas, get them to be the ones that join up, and they should be really happy because then they're going to be in the EU, the Ramonas in particular. That'll be their moment to get into the European Union. Send that lot. See how you get on. I'm sure it'll last about as long as Holland. So I've had to include this because the bullshit coming out continuously, and it's only just ramped up over the last week because you now of course, you know, head of MI6, grandfather fought for the Nazis in Ukraine, and she's half Ukrainian, half Polish. Yeah, we're going to fight for you. I think not. If the true patriots of the UK actually want to do something, and do something of value, just raise some awareness of this kind of information. And whilst you're at it, also raise some awareness about the fact that the UK in particular have actually been trying to start another war using Bosnia and Kosovo. They've literally been trying to get another Balkans war going. Now the EU themselves have been playing their part by doing agitation in Serbia. But from the UK side, again, you won't be surprised to understand that a lot of this is happening because of the criminal Blair. And they've literally been looking to have something that can be started when everybody gets bored of the Russian bullshit, because they're not going to fight Russia because they know that they'll just fucking fall over in an instant. They've been literally looking to rework World War One, and it is, like I say, predominantly, as far as Bosnia and Kosovo is concerned, it's the UK that has been responsible for the underhand activities there. Now, at the moment, you may understand that it hasn't quite been ramping up to your attention, so that something that you might be able to understand. Well, this focus has shifted a little bit, because the EU agitation has shifted from trying to play up in Serbia to really trying to cause problems in Hungary. And so that's kind of waylaid the plans a little bit. But it is something that we absolutely have to keep an eye on, because we do know that they are looking to try to kickstart something in the Balkans again. And as far as that's concerned, rather than me going into any great detail about it, even though I have mentioned this previously, I've put a link in the description to a Delingpole interview with a guy called Alex Craner. You may have seen him around on a few different things. But he's a guy that is originally from Croatia, but he's been very much involved in having conversations with people in both Bosnia and Serbia, and obviously in Croatia as well, to find out information as to what exactly has been taking place. And I'll let him give the explanation to it and that. But it turns out that Trump did actually prevent a lot of that taking place. So that's an interview worth going to have a look at, because if we don't want to see another divisionary war theory tactic take place, because when everybody gets bored of the fact that nothing's going to happen with Russia, they're going to want to see a fight happen somewhere, something to be able to distract away from everything that they're doing wrong. And like I say, they've already chosen the Balkans to do it again, because they were responsible for the first one as well. So that's one side. Not exactly population data related, but kind of. Especially if you want to keep any level of population, because they just send you all out to die, wouldn't they? So, moving into North America, this is the raw data, nothing much to see here. Variance, same as everywhere else. This past year or so, flat line. So, fairly stable insofar as that's concerned, that around the world, which again is a part of a problem, but nevertheless. Into the granular data for North America, and we can see down at the bottom there's another decline. This 0.81% to 0.8. It means that the level of population increase has actually not as much as it had been. However, the most obvious criticism I've had before is how the claims of the number of deportations and self-deportations for the US numbers were just not showing up at all. So you can see at the top here, there's just been this fairly consistent level of increase every 3 months. So that doesn't really meet with what's been coming out of the Trump office, so to speak. But then keep in mind, this is based off of worldometer numbers. And so, has this roughly around 460,000 a quarter consistent increase actually taken place when you compare it to government information? At this point, I'm only going to look just at 2 countries, and I'm going for obviously the US and Canada. But you can quite plainly see that worldometer is way off. I mean, this is over-reporting the US numbers by more than 5 million. So if we consider the US's government official source as being the legitimate information, then that would suggest that these deportations have had an impact. Very much so. Unfortunately, that the date that I got the information for the US, and that was literally the same day that I took the worldometer information. Canada, on the other hand, is the reverse, where they're under-reporting them by nearly 1.5 million. Of which I dare say 100% came in from India, judging by the reports. But this is not something that I've got in my notes here at the moment. That was something that I'm recalling. Just yesterday, there was a post put out on X, a news item, saying that Canada's population has fallen for the first time in however many years it's been. Well, what I can say, both from worldometer numbers and Canada's own official numbers, that is not true at all. That's just a piece of rhetoric that the Canadians have suddenly decided that they think they need to put out, and it's a lie. It's an outright lie. Obviously, you can tell that both of these nations have got I've managed to get the most up-to-date figures. But what you can also tell, insofar as Canada is concerned, is that in terms of the numbers of people that they're importing, they're literally as mad as the UK. but then that's going to be a bit of a common theme when it comes down to UK territories. So, people in the US, it has been happening. The deportations have been happening. Anybody that is using this worldometer data, you just go, right, is the government providing the right data? Because if they are, those deportations have been taking place. So, Australasia, there's your raw data, reasonable levels of increase in that from the likes of Australia and so forth. Variation, apart from these anomalies, it's relatively stable, but if you remember last time I did mention about New Caledonia that had suddenly taken this downward turn, and I had determined that this was apparently because they were in the grip of some political violence because of what was going on in France. Now apparently they've recovered those numbers. And so it is a little bit fortunate that at the time when I looked into the political violence, it had basically said that there was about 13 people had been killed. And so not quite the 9,500 that the drop had represented, but considering the recovery number is around the 10,500 mark, it does pretty much bring them back up on par. I suppose we could say that there might be a little bit of a dip in Australia recently. Been getting rid of the Jews again by a certain type of demographic that never does anything wrong. Absolute bloody mystery wrapped up in an enigma, that one, isn't it? Anyway, granular information. Overall, there's yet another continent with this 0.01% drop from the previous quarter. So despite the fact that the numbers are relatively good for the Oceania area, it's still not quite escaping this problem of reducing population if we take the worldometer numbers as given. But then if we take the data from the governments, and here again I've just got the two pieces of information, which is from Australia and then New Zealand. Australia's numbers are up to date, and then New Zealand is from the end of September. And we can see that worldometer numbers being too low. I mean, in terms of Australian numbers, well, perhaps, well, we already know that they're not going to do it, but maybe not importing terrorists would be a good idea. And so maybe worldometer hasn't caught up with the amount of terrorists that Australia has decided to bring in. I would imagine then that, you know, even if worldometer is using the numbers and then creating it as a model, and hence why you get this sort of stable kind of increase or decrease. From this particular piece of information, I would suggest that even worldometer hadn't imagined that the Australians and New Zealanders would be this thick. So number-wise, it's obviously not as retarded as Canada, but I mean, you'd have to be a pretty special kind of stupid to go as far as Canada. Mark Carney, what can you say? South America, there's your raw data. This is was it Brazil, I think. This is the only piece that stands out really, but covered that one before. And there's your month-by-month variation, and look, over the same period again, this year and a half or more, fairly stable. No variation, or lack thereof. In terms of the granular information then, this is the first continent that shows a slight increase. in terms of the comparison, the per year comparison compared to the previous reporting period. So it's actually gone up by 0.01%. As a point of raised eyebrows, but I do notice that the Falkland Islands obviously had no shift in population whatsoever for an entire year, according to Worldometer. I will show the numbers that I do have from the Falkland Islands, but suffice to say that absolutely no change whatsoever is somewhat doubtful. So this time I'm going to go back to doing 3 examples, including what I could find from the Falklands. So in the first instance, we've got Brazil from their 2022 census, Colombia, which is surprisingly up to date. Sometimes you can get a little bit surprised that certain countries are doing a little bit more than you think they are. And then the best that I can get for the Falkland Islands, which you'd expect to be able to do things up to date, the best I can do from them is the 2021 census. So there you go. That does then mean that because of the specific time that they've stated, the best that I could fall back on there was data from later on in 2022, as the 2021 data that I had, and that was from March. So that was when I wasn't doing it in this consistent 3-month basis. So anyway, Brazil, something of a standout, because comparing these numbers, Worldometer is staggeringly well over by 13 million. They're reporting by nearly 13.5 million of over-reporting the Brazilian population numbers. They're over 600,000 with Colombia. I mean, to be wrong by over 13.5 million, that's pretty disgraceful, isn't it, really? And then obviously that when we're looking at the Falklands and that, they seem to have got things wrong by about 60. But considering the variation of the time between the census and the numbers that I actually had, yeah, it could be excusable. But the Brazil one, most definitely not. When we're seeing the level of discrepancy that Brazil has got, then compare that as well with the likes of the US's incorrect information. Again, we're looking at something that is demonstrating a problem with the data that people are using. And we're not done yet. So, here's Africa. There's the raw data. You can see Nigeria and that going all the way up, which definitely means there's going to be a war there, as I pointed out last week, considering they're war gaming. The month-by-month variance. I mean, this one, with a lot of the countries and that, can be a little bit difficult to tell that because they were all squashed together. But suffice to say that it is pretty much a flat line going back over the period. So then into the granular, we've got the familiar pattern of the change from the last quarter's percentage, where Africa as a nation has dropped by this 0.01%. But here I'm going to bring up another 3 examples of comparing with government data. And this time we've got Egypt and Ethiopia, who've both got up-to-date information. So literally nobody else should have any excuse. And then we've got Tanzania with a little bit of lagging here and that, where they've got information from the 2022 census. The level of over-reporting here again is absolutely criminal, especially Ethiopia, where Worldometer is over-reporting by 25.5 million. Not good. I mean, the Egypt over-reporting is also bad enough, considering that's getting on for 11 million. But those Ethiopian numbers are absolutely ridiculous. Then, of course, Tanzania as well. Like you got another getting on for 3 million there as well. That's, yeah, well, 2.5 million, let's say. Now, the thing that I've got to demonstrate here is that the examples that I've used amount to just 13 countries. Not a single one of the data sets is a match. Not one of them. And when I put it all together in terms of the level of underreporting of population and the over-reporting of population, the problem that this all amounts to, just from those 13 countries, over-reporting the population by nearly 67 million, just from 13 countries. Now, the overall data that I produce here covers 235 nations. So God only knows what the real number is. I mean, how many hundreds of millions are being over-reported? Or what level of inconsistency or how incorrect the overall population of the world is? If this is any indication to go by, then I think it's pretty obvious that it is going to be possibly in over hundreds of millions. And so by that means the overall population of the world could be actually less than the 8 billion that we all thought it was since 2023. And obviously I have to stress again that being up and around the 8 billion mark certainly doesn't need to be some sort of level of hysteria that we hear in terms of whether that's overpopulation or that was the peak and so now we're in the collapse period. The only thing that we really need to be paying attention to here, and that is that the fact that so many decisions are made based on population information. The simple fact of the matter is that it's just like all other areas of data that I check on. These are not reliable numbers. The information that we're getting can't be taken on face value. If I sort of go in the opposite direction, I think we can safely understand that most nations are crap at providing real information. And then, the fact that there's a great many instances where we know that countries are not counting their populations correctly. And I mean, I've shown an example of that one before, and that with Papua New Guinea in particular. But it just doesn't seem that even if I do all of the government official data and run the full comparison, it doesn't seem likely that any of the information that is going to give us anything to be concerned about one way or the other, to be perfectly frank. But one thing it will do, or should do, is then also raise questions in terms of the fertility data. Because where do they how do they make their fertility calculations if it's not by the inclusion of population data? So if the population is incorrect, guess what the fertility rate is going to be? I think at the moment, and that at least according to the Worldometer, which is proven to be wrong, They're saying that the world population fertility rate is 2.2. The problem, again, that I have to repeat here, and that is that I literally saw a video the other day of somebody talking about economic decisions, and that the one piece of information that people can rely on is how many children there will be at any particular given point in time, because you just look at the births, you have some level of understanding around mortality rates, and you can be able to plan for the future according to the figures of births. No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't rely on this data. And the more skewed this becomes, the more difficult it's going to be to have any kind of long-term planning. So this is me basically showing you that we do have an issue with data. When it comes down to the world position, and this is literally just based off of Worldometer information only, the overall population increases on a monthly basis are reducing. And when you're adding in each quarter the increase to the average, and then that average is reducing, and then the number, the population increase for that month is also reducing, that's how you end up with a much larger overall sort of picture as to what level of reduction it is that we're looking at. So the one thing that does seem to have been settling over the last 6 months at least is that the level of increase in the population has decreased by minus 24%, if you understand what I mean. So the level of increase is actually dropping by 24%. Is that true? Based on the government data so far, just from those 13 countries, no, probably an awful lot less than that. So I will start to be trying to gather and keep up with as many countries' information as I possibly can, so we can start to demonstrate this more and more. But if this is anything to go by, then yeah, a lot of the rhetoric that you see from various people that are pretending to be the professionals in this area, it raises questions when they're trying to push hard narratives. Now, I did say last time as well that the number of abortions was looking likely to have dropped. And so we can see that abortions around the world have ended up at this 43, let's just round it up and that, the 43.5 million, which is an absolutely appalling number, don't get me wrong. But the comparison that I need to make there is, what was it last year at this stage? Abortions are down by 41%. That's not bad, is it? Keep that one going. So overall, what does this really sort of mean? As I said, the big questions that are always put to people, I mean, have you got this problem of overpopulation, or are we facing this population collapse? Nobody seems to have a middle ground with this. So let's consider some fairly basic comparisons that we can make, which is that it kind of depends where you come from. And generally speaking, when you've got people that are living in cities which are getting more and more crowded, more and more mammalians being imported into them, There you'll find that the rhetoric goes that we've got overpopulation because they don't really seem to be able to see beyond their city. When it comes down to the population collapse situation, I think that's generally people trying to look at this wider view but create a narrative, not necessarily being based in reality. So even if I do consider that worldometer numbers are a little bit on the dodgy side, let's consider this. These are the numbers for the world during the decade when so many people seem to claim that this was the last great decade. The 90s was the last great decade. Okay. Can't say that I think that was particularly true, but never mind. I mean, I wasn't in the UK for the near enough all of it. I left the UK in 1991, so... Anyway, I've also thrown down the bottom there the year of our Lord, when I entered the fray. Slight overly optimistic there. Slight exaggeration. Anyway, right, before anybody cries and wails, I am aware of the proposition of the rising median age and the claim of there not enough young people and all that sort of stuff. And then again, this issue with the fertility rate and so forth. But my point here really is that the population of the world is nowhere near collapse. You could halve the world population now, and it would still be more than when I entered this mortal coil. You could lose 25% of the population, and it would still be more than the claimed best decade. Basically, both of these claims are about as much use as the climatards in the 90s telling us that the world was going to end in 2012. It's nonsense. So essentially, in either direction, over, under, there is no crisis. And to back this up, the next instalment that I do is going to have a different title page, because I think I've gathered enough evidence now to demonstrate that this the real problem that we have is just bad information. So trying to do this, the Scs Depopulation Program, probably doesn't really stack up too well. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are certain areas of the Malthusian mouthpiece is still taking place. There's been plenty of examples of that. But is it this situation where everybody's about to just suddenly drop dead? No. So when you have bad information, it means that, again, people are making bad decisions. And yes, that does include the fact that most political positions, generally speaking, are not very much related to producing accurate information anyway. But just the mere attempt of them trying to say that they're trying to make certain decisions based on the information, that there's a reason why that would be wrong. So if we are going to be looking at decisions about what we're going to do about population and about how we consider it on an economic basis is the fundamental part of this, and then how we apply the solutions that we think are necessary. I do think we need to be looking at things that might be more easily checked. And so I'm going to use a couple of examples here, and obviously I'm going to stick with the continent that seems to have the biggest problem, and so I'm going to deal with the European Union and the UK. And I obviously, and that'll be separating them on purpose, because the UK, not only are we not a part of the European Union, but, well, in name only. And that's getting worse, but anyway. But we're also not a part of the continent. Doesn't matter what anybody says. We're an island. And so the one thing that we should be giving a lot of consideration to is how we're actually using information that is going to be giving opportunity for the young in particular. Because let's consider this information. And just looking at the UK first, because we're more important. Only 52.2% of our 16 to 24-year-olds are in employment. 15.3% of them are claiming unemployment. This kind of information is very, very rarely stated, because they'll always focus on what the numbers are for the total working age population. And so they have the bad news, which they don't really care about, obviously, where the overall working population, unemployment is now at 5.1%. But then, as I have pointed out before, 25% of the population aren't actually in employment. They're just inactive. But the youth are most definitely the hardest hit. And the whole population is in a situation that is, quite frankly, I mean, this is unprecedented. I mean, despite my tender age at the time, I do remember the 70s, and they were truly awful. But what we've got now in terms of numbers is an awful lot worse. And it's just being consistently, willfully compounded by importing third world rapists by the millions. Those people can only, including the ones that are demanding it as well, all they can do in that is just punt from the state, or work in the aptly named black market. And all you're getting here now is just simply pushing bad numbers further and further towards, never mind population collapse, you're pushing it towards economic collapse. That is far more likely. How you've got such bad employment numbers and you're still operating in an open door policy is utterly insane. I don't care that they turn around and say, "Oh no, there's certain sectors where we don't seem to be able to get the employees that we want." Liars. Utter liars. The EU then. Now you'll notice with the EU that they're not exactly forthcoming about the full data for them. They only want to show the unemployment and not the total inactive. The wonderfully transparent EU. Now, for the longest time, the EU areas had much, much worse youth unemployment than the UK. And even today, in that places like Spain are still at around 25%. So that's just people unemployed. So this kind of situation for the young people all across these countries is where the real problem lies. I mean, for the life of me, any other country in the continent of Europe that's considering membership to this absolute shit show is just completely beyond me. I don't know what you could be thinking on that one. But that's another issue really, because probably the true issue across all nations is the extent of gross lying and propaganda to tell you that everything is fine and dandy. Oh, the European Union is doing brilliantly. oh, the UK, the economy is doing great. We've decided that GDP grew by 0.01%. And then you find out 2 weeks later, no, it didn't. The lying and propaganda in order to be able to swallow up other gullible nations that are relying on false data. Trust the socialist plan. None of them are discussing reality. We can't trust their numbers. We can't trust what they say. And the fact that these people are just such outrageous liars, I dare say the situation is actually even worse. So, I said, this is precisely why they are utilising things like that as something I'm going to have to keep mentioning again, this divisionary war theory. So they can create both internal and external conflict in order to be able to distract from the fact that it is an absolute shit show across the board. For any of these nations to be allowing any level of immigration, let alone third world rapists and terrorists, to the absolute detriment of their young, is once again simply insane. If there is an issue with the young people having children, I think that's probably the least of the problems. The young people are going to be just not caring about anything because there's literally nothing to suggest that they've got any kind of future. So if anybody wants to have any genuine conversations around population, it would be kind of based on like the UK version of this series that I did. Let's focus on how many of the elderly are being killed off at quite a remarkable rate. And then the absolute total disregard and frankly outright abuse towards our youth. Especially the indigenous youth. So the white boys. The abuse is absolutely staggering. Now I'm happy to produce data for the rest of the world because I'm not an isolationist as far as that sort of thing is concerned. And I do love the fact that some of the nations in this episode, like Egypt and Ethiopia, are producing more up to date information than some of the so-called first world nations. I do think that there would be a future where the nations cooperate on the basis of, particularly on the basis of excess resources, but certainly not on the basis of send us all of your reject rapists. That would be a really stupid thing to do. So I hope I've demonstrated a little bit in terms of how we are in a situation where when they want to talk about misinformation and disinformation and things like that, everything that is being used in this narrative is either falsely directed or just outright wrong. So I will definitely have dragged on for long enough by now. And so just understand, when people use official data, at best you're dealing with somebody that is guessing. And in general, what you're going to be dealing with is somebody that is wanting to be able to create a narrative, whichever side it's on. Take a good look at the reality around you, around your nation, and certainly don't do the mistake of falling into the trap of city idiocy thing. Understand the complete contradictions and hypocrisy of not only your population data but your economic information as well. like I say, when you get retards that are slapping themselves on the back and saying that they've created growth, as you watch vast numbers of lives being swilled down the drain, it literally does end up being a situation where it's up to us to be better than them, and not to be distracted by complete bullshit numbers, bullshit narratives, anybody telling you there's a crisis of this and a crisis of that go nowhere near an actual problem. So, aside from that, I will continue to do this series. I will continue to look at the population around the world. I will expand on the number of countries and their so-called official information to see how it does compare with this worldometer stuff. And occasionally it might bode well for people to say, well, look, if we do have one of these experts that is telling you that something dramatic is happening, your first port of call should be, well, where are you getting your information from? Fairly straightforward. So apart from that, what I do have in store is I'm going to do a Christmas video for you. Initially I wasn't 100% sure what the Christmas video was going to be about, but I have now made my decision. And so, I mean, I'll also be doing like the boring, my predictions for the year and all that sort of stuff, and I'll do that a little bit later on, but I'm going to do a video for Christmas Day and that, which again is going to have to be something that is based on solutions, because I've seen a couple of people, the sort of the name type scenarios, where it's, again, we're falling into this we're falling into this trap of raising awareness of what the problem is. Oh, here is this particular problem. Did you know about this? Well, okay, I think everybody does understand that there's a problem already, but, you know, being able to explain it and this type of stuff, and that, it's all very well and good. I haven't got a problem with that. And then you've got others that are turning around and saying, well, okay, well, we need to be able to create some kind of a solution to be able to solve this kind of problem. But then they're talking about having a solution, but not actually providing one. So what I will do, once again, try to condense it as best I can, so it doesn't drag on for too long, because, you know, it will be a solution, but it will not be the most detailed solution, because there's only so many hours in a day. I'll give you an overview as to some of the stuff that you can and should be doing, and things that you need to be looking towards doing in the new year. Are various things that I've said before, but it bears repeating because it is something that needs to be driven home for people to actually start doing. Where others won't provide a proper piece of advice of solution for people to actually do themselves, that's what I'll present. That will be my Christmas present to you. So, I mean, it is kind of strange now, because I've literally had a conversation today about a wide variety of these kinds of areas, and it wasn't me turning around and saying the country has got a problem with this, the country's got a problem with that, but this was the other guy saying it, and I'm just sort of like, okay, regular folks understand what the problem is. That's fine. That message has well and truly broken through. But like most people, his final comments were, I don't know what we're supposed to do about it. Well, I'll start informing people of what they can do about it. And it's about time that that started to spread far and wide. Some of it I can help out with for free. Quite a bit of it I can't. I have to live as well. So that will be something for you to look forward to. If you've got bugger all else to do on Christmas Day, I'll have made sure that I've uploaded a video for you to watch. Watch it with the family. I'm sure that will really make everybody's day. Right. So I think that'll do it. I went on for long enough. Any questions, as per usual, links in the description, contact details in the description, comment on the video, whatever. Give some feedback in terms of how you think the best way of collating the information is. That's always a good conversation to have. What's the best way to collate accurate information? And whatever you do, don't tell me we need to get the information from the supermarket. No, we don't. We need to get the information from the sewage company. No, we don't. You keep forgetting tourists and all manner of other people that come into the country. That is not going to give you an accurate number. But anyway, any other ideas, let me know. So, on that quiet ending, I shall see you on Christmas Day. Take care now. Bye-bye.